It's Commodore Sam coming to you again from LA, Lower Alabama. What I've got for you today is a Meatloaf drive for your Commodore computer. A Meatloaf drive is basically a network uh, drive, if you will. It's an open source project, and it's basically an IEC serial multi device emulator for the Commodore 64 and other 8-bit computers. Basically any computer that uses a IEC port to talk to disk drives, and so the Meatloaf drive presents itself to the Commodore or other computer as a virtual disk drive. Similar to the SD to IEC or the Pi 1541, it has some local storage. You can load programs from that local storage. But one of the things that makes the Meatloaf different is that it will actually load programs from the internet or from your local network over Wi-Fi. And so it really, you could call it a Wi-Fi to IEC device. So basically it was created by, or the Meatloaf project was created by Jaime Johnston, who goes by Jaime idolpx on Discord and elsewhere. And he was thinking, okay, well, I want this drive to do this and I want it to do that, but I don't want it to do that. And so he kind of named it after the artist Meatloaf. But anyway, I'll show you the forms that it comes in. Basically, one form that it comes in is this little board here, where this plugs in inside. If you happen to have an Ultimate device, either a Commodore 64 Ultimate or an Ultimate 64 from Gideon, this plugs into a header that's actually inside on the board right behind the IEC port inside the computer. So you can really have it nice and neat inside the computer. Or well, let me show you an example of that. This is an Ultimate 64 in a clear case, and there is a Meatloaf inside there. Hopefully the camera will focus on that. So there's a Meatloaf right there inside of the device. So nice and neat and concealed. Now, you may not be a fan of nice and neat and concealed, or you may have a traditional old school device, a Commodore 128, an older Commodore 64 like this one. And so you can get the device similar to the form of an SD to IEC, where it plugs in externally, and it plugs into the IEC port here, and it can get its power either from the tape port, or it can get its power from any USB brick that you might have for your phone. Now, I'm going to be using this one in this computer, as a matter of fact, just instead of the Meatloaf inside, just so you can see that even on a traditional Commodore 64, an 80s Commodore 64, you can do these kind of cool things by loading files from the internet. So without any further ado, let's get started and do some demoing. Okay, real quick, I just wanted to show you the setup, because basically the rest of this video I'm going to be running from the capture card, but I just wanted you to see what the setup here looks like. And this is really just so I can capture the video for you from a standard 64. One of the first things that you want to do when you get your Meatloaf is, you bring it up to this, you've turned it on, you've got it hooked up, you're sitting here at this ready prompt. What do you need to do? Well, what you need to do to start with is you need to load and set your Wi-Fi settings, right?
So you want to load Wi-Fi COM8. Now your Meatloaf needs to be connected to the IEC port and on and functioning as a drive. And when you do this and you run it, um, then you come to this program here and you put in W. Now I happen to have this already configured, so you're going to see the last Wi-Fi SSID and IP address there, and you'll see the current firmware version. Um, and then it'll display all of the Wi-Fi's that it can see, all the APs or the SSIDs that it can see. And so what you would do is you would type in your SSID, not how it shows at the top with the uppercase, with the lowercase c and all that, but exactly like it shows under the scanning Wi-Fi. That's the way you would type it, and whichever one you choose, right? And then you'll put in the password, and the password is case sensitive. I'm not going to actually do that, but I wanted to point out that this is when you get your meatloaf or you make a meatloaf, this is the very first thing that you need to do is set your Wi-Fi settings. And you'll find that Wi-Fi program sitting in the flash memory on the Meatloaf, and that'll make more sense to you later on when we start talking about all the different things that the Meatloaf does. And the first thing I want to show you is basically the local storage. The local storage concept is very similar to an SD to IEC. It can access internal flash. It can access the SD card. And so again, this is a drive that works just like a Commodore disk drive. And so even though I've got Jiffy DOS here, just kind of to get that elephant out of the room, I'm going to be using Jiffy DOS later on. But in these initial commands, I just wanted to show you what what it looks like with a standard 64. If you don't have Jiffy DOS, it will work. It just works better with Jiffy DOS. And so, just like in a normal Commodore 64 loading, you can load the directory. So here I am loading the directory of the Meatloaf, and you can see that I have a bunch of files sitting here on the Meatloaf. The file system that the Meatloaf uses basically has two bits of local storage. You've got the flash memory, which is all of the lines that are from network down. That's all sitting in the flash memory of the Meatloaf. The SD card that is inserted into the Meatloaf is all the contents of that SD card live under that SD directory that's at the very top. And that's basically the local file system that it has. And you can, of course, put as much as the flash memory will hold of the ESP32 that you have. You can put as much as you want in that flash memory via WebDAV and other methods. And I won't be going into all of that side of things during this video. I'm just going to show you basically how to operate your Meatloaf from a Commodore 64. And so anyway, on the Commodore 64, this is the local file system. You've got the flash memory and you can put files there. You of course can put files in the SD card. And if I want to change directory into the SD card, I can use Jiffy DOS commands. I can use normal commands. Just like on the SD to IEC, I can use FB file browser, and it'll function just like normal. So if I go load FB comma 8 comma 1 and I go run, then it's going to navigate files just like you've seen on an SD to IEC. If I go into the SD folder, you'll see that I've got PRGs and a D64 here, and while we're talking about that, yes, the Meatloaf will load D64s, navigate those, D71s, pretty much all of the normal Commodore file types it will manage. But it'll manage a lot of file types that a Commodore won't, like zip and tar and a lot of other things. So really, the Meatloaf is a little more advanced in that regard, in that it can browse other file types. So anyway, that's that's the normal operation of FB like you're used to seeing, right? Again, you can load the directory using the load commands and all that. Now, of course, if you're familiar with Jiffy DOS, I'll throw this in here. Jiffy DOS, you could either put in the command like this and display the directory. Of course, that's a non-destructive load, and it doesn't destroy the basic program that's in memory. Or I can hit F1 like I just did, and it'll show the directory as well. So from a local storage standpoint, it operates just like a Commodore 64 loading a disk from a disk drive or using SD to IEC. That is going to work like normal. So that's nothing unusual, right? That's nothing special as far as the Meatloaf is concerned. But what makes a Meatloaf different? What makes it special? Well, let me show you. Here's one example. I'm going to again use the traditional load command just to show you the full syntax here. I'm going to load http colon slash, and I'm going to put in a address that is out on the internet. Now, normally when you, so I'll hit enter here, okay, just like normal. Now, it just went out to the internet to that http c64.meatloaf.cc, that web address, and it loaded the directory that lives there. And so, which is a little bit, maybe you wouldn't expect that, right? It's kind of like loading a disk, right? It's like loading a D64, and then you can list the contents of it. So it's like inserting a web disk, if you will. Okay. So how does this work, right? So if I put in this load command and I'm putting in the this C64 Meatloaf, if I can type comma 8 comma 1, why does this work? Well, the reason this works is because of the way disk drives work on Commodore computers. And for one thing, you got to start off with this concept of when I put in a load command, that load command means something to the DOS operating system that is on this Commodore, right? By DOS, I don't mean Microsoft DOS. I mean disk operating system. And that DOS understands that anytime I put in a load command, and if I put what's in and I put something in quotes, that is the command that it's going to send. And where is it going to send it? It's going to send it to drive 8, right? To device 8 out on the IEC bus. So if you know anything about Commodores, then you've probably heard that a disk drive for a Commodore is really just another computer. And so when you issue this load command and you're talking to another computer, well, what computer are you talking to out on this serial bus that you might have multiple devices attached to? Well, I'm talking to device 8 on that serial bus, on that IEC bus. And so it's up to the device it's up to device 8 in this case to take what's inside of the quotes and to use that information to return something that the Commodore 64 will actually understand. So if you issued, when you issue a quote $sign in close quote $8 on a Commodore 1541 disk drive, that Commodore 1541 disk drive understands what that $sign means. It got to the Commodore disk drive because you told it to go to device 8. Well, what does that Commodore 1541 do? Well, it's a Commodore, so it knows to communicate back to the Commodore 64 the information, the command that you gave it, right? And so most of you will know that sometimes you put a (1) after loading an address. Well, what that is it's telling the Commodore 64 where to put the information that was loaded from the 1541 or the disk drive. Where once I go out there and get it, when I tell that 1541 a command and it returns information, where is it going to go? Well, 1 tells it to go into machine language, and when you don't do 1, it basically puts it at the start of BASIC. So it's where in memory it's going to go inside the Commodore 64. So when I'm loading these directories, I want it to be in BASIC so that I can list it, right? And so what this command is saying is load, and it says, hey, device 8, load this address. Now, in this particular case, the Meatloaf is another computer that understands it understands these different protocols that are being given it. So it understands that if it starts off with HTTP and an address, a web address, then I need to go out and use HTTP to navigate that web address and bring back information. Right now, that web address has to be a site that will return information that makes sense, right, for a Commodore, right? So it can't just be any old website. It's got to be one that is set up for access. In this particular case, in the case of an HTTP protocol, that HTTP server out there on the internet's got to return the right information. So anyway, when we do this command here and it goes and it executes, when it returns that data, it's returning it into the BASIC area, and that's because we didn't use a (1), and that's why when we hit list, we're just listing what's in BASIC. So we get the BASIC, the directory listing, like we normally do in other with a regular disk drive. So another point I wanted to make is that when it you're familiar with the fact that I've got Jiffy DOS on here, right? There are other fast loaders out there besides Jiffy DOS. There's some that are based on Jiffy DOS, like Jaffy DOS and Dolphin DOS and all this kind of stuff. And there's fast load cartridges and all of these fast loaders. What they are really doing is replacing the DOS on either the Commodore 64 or on the disk drive, or both. Jiffy DOS replaces, if it's set up properly, you have both the computer with a Jiffy DOS ROM in it, and you have the disk drive with a Jiffy DOS ROM in it. Or if it's an emulated disk drive, then it emulates the Jiffy DOS ROM on it. So it'd be a software ROM. So these computers are communicating in a certain language. And so in the case of Jiffy DOS or Commodore DOS or CBM DOS, as it's called, the two machines must talk the same language, right? And so that's just how it's working in the background. So from this point forward, I'm going to use Jiffy DOS commands just because they're faster. So for example, if I wanted to load that same address, instead of putting the load, I would just put in / and I'd put in HTTP : C64 .meatloaf.cc and I hit enter. And that did the exact same thing. Notice it was even maybe a hair faster. Maybe, you know, this part is so small it doesn't really make a difference. But you can see I loaded that same site, right? And I'm gonna list, and then I'm gonna hit run stop because I want to stop it before it goes everywhere. One of the things that I wanted to point out here is that, okay, so there's FB sitting out there on this directory that I just went to. So what if I wanted to run FB from that internet site out there? Well, I can do that. I'm going to use the Jiffy DOS. I could type in load here and put the comma 8 on the end and space out the PRG or put a colon or what, all the different tricks. The Jiffy DOS trick is to run that by hitting the up arrow right here and hitting enter, and it's going to load the FB. So that just loaded the file browser off of the Meatloaf website. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out is notice at the very top, it says URL, and then it's got the address that we went to. Well, this is something that Meatloaf does, is when it returns a directory back to the Commodore 64, it inserts notes, if you will, at the top of the directory listing, so you can really tell what that directory listing is of, right? Because it could be a lot of things when it's out on the internet. So in this particular case, it knows that it used a HTTP address, so it's saying, okay, this is the URL, and here's the address that I went to. Now I can still navigate this just like normal. I can come down here and choose to go to one of these folders, and I can load software from one of these. So if I go into app, for example, and I go into and load one of these programs, I can load it, right? I'm not going to do that right now. We'll come back and do that in a minute. But and if I navigate backwards and go back, it's going to load in the previous directory. So FB works even though I am accessing this data out on the internet. So I'm going to quit here because I want to show you some other things. So I talked about the fact that it would, load stuff from HTTP. Well, it'll also load from other protocols. And so other protocols like FTP. So if I go to FTP : and then go to Zimmer's, I think it's ftp.zimmers.net is, I believe, what it is. And I load that, and guess what? I hit list. There is the directory of the FTP server on Zimmer's. And so if I go in, I can go into one of these directories. If I go into the public directory, and so I want to show you one thing here. Normally in the world of Jiffy DOS, I can just hit CD : and I could put in, I want to change into that directory pub, right? And hit enter. And if I hit list, did I go into pub? No. And that's because that's not how the Meatloaf works. Remember that just because your computer knows something, that doesn't mean that the device that you're talking to knows that. So how am I going to communicate to that device? How do I communicate with the Meatloaf? This part is the one thing that's kind of a little bit different, right? What I want to do is I want to load that directory, not change directory into there. So and now by doing that deal that I just did, I actually kind of messed up the thing. So if I go up here and I say I want to load pub, it's going to say file not found. And the reason it's going to say file not found is because I actually messed up by hitting trying to do the @cd to change directory into it. So I'm going to correct my mistake, and so I'm going to do it the Meatloaf way. And so I'm going to hit FTP and then ftp.zimmers.net and hit enter, right? So I'm going back to that site. If I hit list, then I'm back to where I was. Now, again, so the way you want to change directories with Jiffy DOS and with the Meatloaf is you just load whatever you want to load. So just kind of keep it simple, right? Just keep it simple and just always do a load. So if I want to go up here and I want to go into this public directory, I just hit load and it'll work fine. And again, I hit list and here's where I'm at now. Well, I want to go into the CBM folder. I hit /enter and I go into the CBM folder and I hit list. Now, if I want to go into, I'm going to shorten, hit run stop, and I want to go into the C64 folder and hit that slash and enter there, and I hit list, and I've got all of these directories that I can go in and I can run. I can go into games and run. So you can see it goes on and on and on. I can go all the way in, and so I can go in here and I can run one of these PRGs and but we're not going to do that yet. Same thing normally, right? So I'll put it in lowercase so you can see some of those PRGs, and there's Star Trek at the top, right? So anyway, that is the way it was. So far we've navigated HTTP, an HTTP server that was set up for Meatloaf. We've navigated an FTP site that wasn't even set up for Meatloaf. It's just a standard FTP site because the Meatloaf understands FTP. Now, it'll do other protocols like TNFS. So I'll go to this Meatloaf site here. I'm going to be going to Meatloaf a lot today, obviously. so I can go into a TNFS network. And again, do the exact same thing that I was able to do with the other protocols. So no matter which protocol it is, it'll work fine. So there's a lot of protocols that it supports. FSP, NFS, SMB, SFTP, AFP, iSCSI, a lot of different things that we're not going to cover today for brevity's sake. And again, I wanted to reiterate that it'll support many different media types. So it'll support D64 files, D71 files, D81 files, D80 files, D82, 90, D90, DNP, D8B, DFI, even the zip files and RAR files and tar files and T64 files for those of you that are that like tape. I'm not sure if that works with the Jiffy DOS the way loading through Meatloaf, but it might. I haven't tried that. I need to try it. So anyway, you can see that you can do all of these cool things and load files all different ways. Well, I'm going to show you one more protocol that is a Meatloaf only protocol, right? So Meatloaf has this concept of short codes, and you can go to the web address meatloaf.cc and you can see what those short codes are. But basically what a short code is if I don't want to type in http //meatloaf/ meatloaf.cc, or whatever, this long web address, I can load one that's very short. So I'm going to show you, a long way of doing a particular site is I'm just going to do it the same site two different ways so that you can see how this works. So I could load HTTPS because it does support that, and go to ml.commodore sam.cc / I think it's 6502FB is I think the directory. I may get this wrong. Let's find out. See if I got it right. My server's a little bit slower than the Meatloaf server, So yeah, so if I hit list here, you can see that I am via Earl. I am out here on Meatloaf Commodore Sam, and I'm in the path of 6502 FB. And this is a game that I wrote, that I have living out there on that server. Well, another way to do that is I have a short code. Now, whenever you're doing a short code for Meatloaf, you always precede it with a protocol of ML for Meatloaf and a colon, right? And then you don't do any slashes. You just put in the short code. So my short code for this directory is pretty simple. So I can do load a Meatloaf short code 6502 FB, hit enter, and it goes to the exact same place without having to type in the long drawn out URL. And that short code can be any name that you want it to be. It can be Timbuktu. It can be hello. But one thing about the short codes is that they can be taken, right? Just like a web address, they can be taken, and obviously you can't have two hellos. So somebody probably has hello, and there's no telling what that is. So in fact, let's do it. I'm sure someone has hello. So I'm going to load hello. I haven't checked this. Nope, nobody has hello, so somebody can go get that. Anyway, so you can go and create your own short codes. You can claim your short codes at meatloaf.cc. So you just go on the internet and go to meatloaf.cc, and you can go claim your own short code. So you can do this and run and access a deal out on the internet. So I'm going to load this. I did want to show you loading a program via Meatloaf. Again, my server's kind of slow. It's not a fast server. It's a cheap one out on the internet. Anyway, so if I hit list here, again, I'm in that directory, and if I want to run my program, I'll just hit the up arrow right here and hit it, and it's going to load my game off of the server and put it into the Commodore 64's memory. And so there's my game, Fart Bombs. And so, which by the way is just a Minesweeper style game. If you know Minesweeper, it does, you're playing Minesweeper with it, right? So you can blow yourself up so if I go over here and blow myself up and clear a bomb, oh, I lost, oh no. Okay. And so that is loading a PRG from a server out on the internet. So pretty cool. Now, that's not the only thing that the Meatloaf will do. So it will load local storage. It will load things off the internet. If I had a server here, in my house, I could browse that. I can do all of those type of things. So that's kind of cool. One of the nice things about having if you've got multiple machines, obviously you can have a Meatloaf on multiple machines and all be accessing one set of files, and you don't have to sneaker net a SD card around every single one of the computers. So that's kind of cool. This also, like I said, the Meatloaf works just like this on a Mega 65, on an Otter X, or a Commander X16, a 128, a +4. All those machines, it will function, because they have a Commodore IEC port that knows how to communicate via the same protocols. And then the Meatloaf does the rest. So this last thing that I'm going to show you is the Meatloaf is a device that is at its core a disk drive. However, Jaime Johnston, who created it, did one other thing that's kind of cool, something that I have not seen on any other ever been done before. I have never seen this bit having been done before. Now, and that is, it will actually act as a modem for terminal emulation um, over the IEC port, not over the user port, not over the cartridge port, not over the tape port, but it communicates out to the internet on to telnet sites, right, via the IEC port. So the program to do that is actually out on Jaime's server. And so I'm going to go to HTTP and we're going to go C64 meatloaf.cc and we're going to load that. And if I hit list here, one of those directories, let me do it again, I'll stop it. One of those directories is the apps directory. Inside the apps directory, which we're going to load, / enter, right? And inside this directory, there is pterm. All right. So pterm is a custom written terminal emulation program for the Meatloaf. And so if I run pterm, it is going out to the internet. It's going to go out to the internet. I'm going to go to the retro campus there. I'm going to hit enter there. And it's going out over to the internet via telnet and accessing the retro campus BBS. And so you can navigate around in here just like normal. If I want to go into games and hit 3, and you'll notice it operates pretty fast, so I can go in here and play one of these games. I'll play tic-tac-toe and let the computer beat me. And so, at least I think I can play this game anyway. So A1, enter. All right. And then the computer went and took the middle, of course. So anyway, you can see that I'm actually out on a BBS via the Meatloaf that is only plugged in to the IEC port. Now, one caveat here is this function really only works on an old Commodore 64. The way that it works, the way that it does this will work on an original machine. It doesn't currently work on a C64 Ultimate or a Ultimate 64. That's because Gideon didn't implement one of the pins that this uses to accomplish this, to accomplish the communication to the ESP32 to act as a terminal emulator, and to communicate to telnet. So because of that, it doesn't currently work now as of this recording, right? So Gideon is supposed to be working on that issue and fixing it so that it will work in future firmwares. So I hope to see that because that would be really cool to be able to use the Meatloaf inside, for example, as that. Now, you don't need it as much on an Ultimate as you do on a regular Commodore 64, right? Because let's talk about that. So when you talk about the Meatloaf and it being in a Commodore 64 Ultimate, the Commodore 64 Ultimate has a lot of features, right? If all you had was the flash card sitting on this device, you can do that on the Ultimate by itself and just use the file system on the Ultimate, right? If all you wanted to do was go to websites The Ultimate has a built-in modem, so you can go to websites, just use CCGMS or any other terminal emulation package that you like to use. So you really don't need a Meatloaf for that. So on a Commodore 64 Ultimate, why would you do that? Why would you want the P term to work? And it's just because, right? And there's an awful lot of that in our world, in the retro world. Why do we do what we do? Just because it's fun to do it. But what you do get with a Meatloaf on a Commodore 64 Ultimate that you don't get any other way is to be able to load files via all of these protocols. You can't go to an HTTP site via, at least not today, via the C64 Ultimate. You can't go to an FTP site via the 64 Ultimate or the Ultimate 64, either one. The only thing that you can do on those two is either browse local storage, or you can go to a BBS and download something, or you can go to to CommoServe in the case of the 64 Ultimate, or you can go to Assembly 64 on the Ultimate 64. So you've got ways to load other things, but you can't do the HTTP, the FTP. You can't load all of the different file types, the zips and the tars and the rars and all those different file types. You can load a lot of file types, but not all of them. And so really the Meatloaf adds a lot of functionality for a very minimal amount of cost. And so with that, that concludes our demo of the Meatloaf. I hope you enjoyed the demo, and I'll see you next time.